Welcome to the LevelTech Podcast, a discussion around the fascinating intersection of sports and technology with a particular focus on the grassroots. LevelTech offers the most accurate ratings platform for racket sports, a useful and powerful algorithm to provide clear, up-to-date ratings to an engaged global community. We're keen to understand how technology can be leveraged to not only enhance the player performance, but also to enrich the fan experience and drive increased levels of engagement across the board. Join us as we navigate this dynamic landscape, bringing insights from experts and uncovering how tech innovations are transforming the way we engage with sports. Whether you're a recreational player, a pro athlete, a coach, a sporting leader, or simply an armchair fan, this is your destination for understanding the future of sports in the digital age. I'm your host, Jethro Binns, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Sam Kemp, Managing Director at R3 Sport. R3 Sport will be making waves in the world of padel, playing a key role in driving competition through the R3 Bull Padel Cup and pushing the sport forward here in the UK. With extensive experience in sports management, Sam has been at the forefront of padel's rapid rise here in the UK, helping shape the sport's competitive structure and building sustainable pathways for players. Today we'll be diving into the current landscape of British padel, the challenges and the opportunity the sport faces, and looking at how ratings, technology and structured competitions are shaping its future. We'll also explore R3 Sport's ambitions, the role of data in padel, and the wider trends influencing the sport's development. Sam, welcome to the podcast. So Sam, it's brilliant to have you on the pod. We've been in communication for a number of years now, and finally, we've got some exciting news, which we'll go into a little bit later, but it's great to be doing something with you. Great to have you here. I'd love you to give a little bit of a background to our listeners about your involvement with padel, your involvement with sport over the years, and a bit of a background on where you've been and what you've done.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. As you say, it feels like a very long time coming, but very pleased to be here. Yeah, I think my personal background, I previously worked for the LTA across a number of different roles, and was lucky enough to be part of the organisation when LTA adopted padel into the business. And I was given the opportunity primarily there to kind of lead on the competition development, specifically around padel and how we can support that to grow as quickly as possible. But that sort of broadened out really into developing padel to grow across venues, players, connections with different brands. And my career, luckily enough, has expanded since then, really. So as padel has grown, I've managed to grow the number of competitions and grow my own responsibilities until I took the very exciting step to join R3 Sport and use that as an opportunity, hopefully, to increase the development of the sport even further. Before then, my career has always been centered around sport. So I love sport. I think very fair to say football is where my heart is. But I've worked across football, netball, tennis, and now into padel. And I love it. I love being part of big events. I love the joy that sport brings people, the connections that it makes. And padel is absolutely perfect to bring all of those core reasons why I love sport together, really.
Awesome. Well, I want to know more about R3, and I think maybe you can shine a bit of a light on R3's history. Obviously, Jonathan Rowlands heads up as chairman. Could you give us a bit more background about, the excitement and interest in padel and what the business kind of plans to do and where things are going with R3 at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very fair to say R3 at its core is a passion project. So Jonathan Rowland, as you mentioned, and Nikhil Mahindra as co-founders deeply love the sport. They've been playing it for a number of years. And I think they see the massive potential that it has to develop in this country. And they've positioned R3 to really support that development. So from the kind of support and the management that we give a number of players, all the way through to trying to give those players the opportunity to compete at the elite level and get the prize money that they so richly need and deserve. The business is really set up to try and drive padel in this country as quickly as possible. And I think it's very fair to say that the business is putting the investment behind what we're looking to do to try and drive that as quickly as possible. So we have 10 players that we manage at the moment, um, including, Christian Medina Murphy as GB number one, Sam Jones as GB number two, Catherine Rose as GB number two. And all of those players are developing brilliantly with our support. They are competing at a much higher level than they have before. They're training far more regularly, and we're really helping them to become more professional and I like to think professionalizing the sport more broadly as well. We have the backing of Ball Paddle, so we've got the exclusive distribution rights for Ball Paddle alongside Max Holloway at MRH Sport, and that's really exciting. Trying to provide really top end equipment and apparel to paddle in this country, and then I'm sure we'll come into it in a lot more detail further on, but the R3 Ball Paddle Cup is really going to come in at the top end of competition delivery. So looking to be the premier professional tour in this country, trying to provide R3 players and more and broader players the opportunity to compete at that level and earn good prize money without necessarily always having to venture abroad for those opportunities.
Well, give us a bit of history then around the kind of pro tour. And I guess there's lots of people who'll be listening to this who are new coming into paddle or coming in from squash, and give us a little bit of history about how the professional game has been run in the UK over the last, I guess, 5-6 years, and how it has evolved.
Yeah, so when LTA was first adopted paddle into its operations, it was British paddle before then, and British paddle was really built on a series of very high-end competitions and events. But probably fair to say then limited backing, kind of limited funding in order to allow those players to be professional. As the LTA took that on, they introduced new grades of competition and started working in partnership with the FIP, so the International Federation. And we saw international events come to this country for the first time. So starting out at the NTC, I mean, it's funny to look back on it now, delivering an international event on 3 courts compared to what we're able to do now. But yeah, delivering that first FIP Rise event as part of the LTA, I think really started to open up the doors to what is possible for the sport. And some would argue that was the first professional, definitely the first international event in Great Britain. And it's only really grown from there. The amount of funding that both the LTA and other organizations have been able to put into Grade 1 events has drastically increased the standard of those events and the amount of money that players can earn. The FIP have done a fantastic job of developing their structure and their number of events, providing more opportunity and more prize money to players, both sort of domestically and internationally. And the LTA have been able to support organisers such as R3 to start delivering more of these events on a more regular basis. And it was only a couple of weeks ago that the LTA announced their plans around their performance competition calendar. And, that's grown from maybe 1 or 2 events back when they first adopted the sport all the way through now to, I think, 8 Grade 1s and 4 FIP events. And each of those are going to have substantial prize money behind them that we hope will filter further down into the tournament to kind of support the whole player base rather than just those at the top. So the growth has been incredible, I think, really from where the top players are now where the top players were to where they are now, and the number of players that are able to earn significant money from competition is fantastic.
And what's the ambition for you with the tour? Is it kind of club focused, or do you see it kind of going to arenas? And how big do you want to create, or how big a paddle events do you want to be putting on under the R3 banner over the next kind of 4 years?
I mean, we definitely haven't been shy about the fact that we see these events going to large event spaces and arenas. I mean, from a personal point of view, I would love to do that much sooner rather than later. And I hope that we're the catalyst for that to begin, to be honest. Um, we are where we are in terms of the infrastructure in this country. The number of courts are increasing all of the time, but the venues are not necessarily setting themselves up, probably correctly so at this stage of the development, um, to be true spectator event spaces. So we're doing the best with what we've got, and venues like Rocket Paddle in Bristol are absolutely fantastic when it comes to number of courts and an amount of space. But if we want to get to a point where we can sell significant tickets, where we can have a really fantastic spectator experience, with a center court that has seating around all four sides, then we need to be driving in that direction. And the R3 Ball Paddle Cup, from our point of view, is step one, and we will hopefully build to the launch of the R3 Paddle Super League, which will then go into those big arenas and really open it up as a spectator sport.
Amazing. So what have been some of the biggest challenges in getting the tour off the ground, and what have you bumped into over the last kind of year or so?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Infrastructure, I think, is very fair to say that's a challenge where if we have the vision of going to these large arenas, how do we pave the way to that vision using the infrastructure and the resources that we have currently? So that's probably been one of the largest barriers or hurdles that we've had to overcome. But I feel like we're in a really good space and working with some great partners to allow us to do that. The calendar is chock-a-block, both from a domestic and international point of view. I mentioned the number of events that the LTA have sanctioned this year. There's no hiding the fact that R3 are not the only businesses within the competition delivery space, and everybody wants their moment to be able to deliver their fantastic events. So trying to find your way through and navigate through when you can get a weekend free and when the players are available is a challenge. And then really it's the spectator interest in the sport and being able to prove that. From a participation point of view, paddle is absolutely booming. We all know the growth there. It's not slowing down, and it won't slow down, in my opinion, for a good while yet. But trying to provide that proof and trying to show the comparison between a paddle player and a paddle spectator um, has been a challenge, and I think that's why we're really putting ourselves forward and positioning our events as much spectator events as player events, so that we can really start to build that whole um, yeah level of evidence to share to show that this is the right time to kind of go big with these events, and we've got that spectator base to warrant going to a large venue.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating in the UK, and it's a really interesting point. I guess you look at some of the events over in Holland, in the arenas over there, and the audiences were, so I'm right in saying 30,000 plus for some of the live matches, which is obviously phenomenal. And I wonder if the UK is quite cottoned on to that, and if how big an event do you think is potentially feasible? Are we able to fill the Royal Albert Hall, as an example, with a paddle court just yet, or do you think we're still a couple of years off that?
It's a great point, and like you mentioned Holland. I'm always a little bit cautious to draw comparisons with the likes of Spain, but if you go to any paddle event in Spain, I mean, it's very, very reasonable to liken that to a lower level Premier League game or Championship football match in this country. The number of fans is astonishing, and yeah, we're a while off of that. But look at examples such as the darts and how they've grown from where they were to, filling up the alley pally, going to a different event space every single week with the Premier League. Badminton have really strong support. Squash get a really good number of spectators at their events. I really don't see why we can't do that very quickly in paddle. Now, whether that will be this year or next year or 3 years' time, I think will be a little bit dependent on companies such as R3 and how good a job we do of putting the offer out there, connecting with broadcast partners and really driving the awareness of padel beyond just those that are picking up a racket and getting on court.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much of my time is spent watching great rallies on YouTube. Now, I'm converting as a paddle player over the last 18 months, from squash playing more and more, but it is an impressive spectator sport in its own right now. And you can see it, I've always said this about squash. I think squash fans are squash players, and I think that's where it starts. But I also think paddle's, it's a spectacular spectator sport in its own right. So I do think it's going to come, and it's been proven in the other countries. I guess we've just, not quite as far along the curve in the UK. But I wonder commercially if you want to share any or shed any light on how it's working. Is it pure sponsorship that's kind of making the events work, or like do you see ticket sales as a route to profitability around events in the short term, or is that really something that you obviously need to get scale with the spectators at? But I'm interested in this commercial side.
Yeah, no, I think from a ticketing point of view, we really need to focus on gaining that scale and increasing the awareness of the sport as a spectator event. For our first event in Bristol, we will be offering completely free tickets to spectators. And I very much foresee that continuing for the next period of time, because for us we just need to get feet through the door. We need to get eyes on our broadcasts and our live streams and people interacting with the sport from a spectator point of view to really show off what it can offer. So ticket sales, I think it's fair to say, really for the foreseeable are not coming into the equation when it comes to the commercial side of delivering these events or of running the business. Commercially, that's going to be driven through partnerships, through sponsorships that we can garner and kind of maximize as part of these events. And I think with the interest in paddle at the moment and the amount that it is growing, it's a nice place to be when you are going to talk to sponsors and partners. It's a sport that these companies and businesses really want to align with and get behind. And a lot of the time we share the same vision. I think I feel you and I have had many discussions around this. Everybody's just trying to get behind the sport to see it grow for the good of the sport, really. And I think from a commercial point of view, that's really helpful. And I hope that, those partnerships and that genuine drive to see the growth of the sport can continue for a good period of time yet.
Yeah, it definitely seems an interesting place to be. And I remember going to the Danish Paddle Open a couple of years ago, and just, it wasn't a big FIP event, but just walking through the kind of the brand village and, the sponsors village, and just thinking it was really like, reminded me of going to the Leaks Classic or the British Open as a junior squash player back in the 90s. And every brand was there, and there was just everybody wanted visibility at events, and paddle's got that excitement and that buzz at the moment. And you see, I guess, the non-endemic brands also want to be associated with it as well, the likes of Vitalities and the insurance groups and whatever it is. It just has this mass appeal and sexiness and coolness, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And I think going back to your other point as well, from a spectator point of view, it looks great. So, it's easy to promote brands and to give them their limelight via social media. It's a very social media friendly sport. So, as much as, you've got your brand villages and your commercial areas at these events, court branding, graphics on the top of high quality photography and shot of the day and all of those sort of things can bring so much value to a brand and repeated value, that for me it's a no-brainer really for any of these industries to be getting involved with paddle. It touches near enough every demographic. It's growing all the time. It's becoming more and more of a global sport every day. I mean, why would you not want to get involved in something like that?
Oh, I completely agree. So let's just talk about obviously your group of British players that R3 are backing, and let's just talk about the standard of professional professional paddle. here in the UK. So, how's that evolved? I guess there's still catching up to do to the Argentinians and the Spaniards, and it's relatively new. So what is the kind of, I guess we can even touch upon junior structures as well, and coaching structures and pathways into that professional game, because you've obviously seen it evolve, and with your understanding from your previous sports experience, these things take time to build. So and just touch upon how we're doing and how the UK is looking and where we're heading.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we're looking a hell of a lot better than we were when I think paddle first came into, say, the more public view. The development of, the players on a very personal level has been astronomical. The speed in which that they've been able to kind of, catch up that ground that the Spanish and the Argentinians have on us, it has been really impressive to watch. There is no denying that there is still a gulf, I think, between particularly Spanish players. But we have to take that with the understanding that they've been playing it, 30, 40 years ahead of us. You've got genuine Spanish players that have grown up with a racket in their hand from as soon as they were able to kind of get on a court, like toddle onto a court. And we're not quite at that stage. The majority of our top players, bar a handful, have converted from other sports and adopted paddle at a later stage. Now, most examples of that is converting from tennis. There's a few outliers, but they haven't had that kind of base of paddle that you would if you were brought up in Spain or Argentina and these other kind of further developed paddle nations. And it's difficult to catch up that space. Um, the likes of Christian, Sam, Catherine, Nikhil, they're all really developing very, very strongly. And sort of Christian, I guess, in the men's game as GB number one, he's getting closer to the top 100 all the time. He's competing regularly in sort of Premier Paddle events. He's getting into FIP Silver, FIP Gold events, and really, really putting in some performances that are hugely creditable for him, and making great strides in his professional career. And the same with Catherine. I mean, Catherine went to Australia recently, and won two events in a row, playing alongside Amy, and the two of those are really leading kind of British paddle from a female point of view. And it won't be long before Catherine breaks into the top 100 either, I'm sure. So we're all developing. They're developing exceptionally well. But yeah, I think there's still a long way to go, and that's going to come from juniors, I think, ultimately. And it's going to come from juniors, and it's going to come from more players getting into the sport. I think those are our two challenges if we look ahead towards the potential of us getting into the Olympics. How are we going to get there? Well, we need more places for people to play, more people playing, and then, real concrete structures for our juniors to be supported and developed in the right way to then get them through to the British team.
Yeah, and I've often thought that, I mean, let's be honest, there's a bit of a, there's that paddle can be a cash cow at the moment, right? There's a shortage of courts, and operators can charge a premium. And, a Saturday morning, which traditionally, if I come from a squash or a tennis background, you would have had Saturday morning junior coaching sessions, and those courts would be set aside. I'm guessing that those courts aren't being set aside in the same way just yet. There will be exceptions, but generally, I imagine court operators are worried about filling those courts, getting bums on seats, knowing they can charge a premium. There's a shortage of courts, and there is money to be made. So I guess it puts us in an interesting spot at the moment, because I imagine the majority of paddle players are 30 to 55-year-old. If you look at the core demographic across the UK, ex-tennis players, ex-squash players converting, and then new people coming into the sports. But it is going to take time until there are more courts, more coaches, more junior sessions, courts become cheaper, it becomes easier to go and take the families down for more junior players to enter the sport. And just interested to get your take on that, and then probably more the accessibility more widely as a sport, how you view it here in the UK at the moment.
It's a very interesting and I guess potentially kind of contentious topic, the space, particularly around kind of court fees, accessibility, availability of courts. I think it's fair to say for anyone, but particularly juniors. I think you described the current space very accurately. There are some exceptional outliers there that I guess truly value paddle as the sport as opposed to an activity in which you can charge people a premium for. And they are setting aside time for junior coaching. They are creating initiatives to get more juniors into the sport and supporting people potentially from kind of lower economical groups to have access to paddle as well, which I think is vitally important. But yeah, in my personal opinion, I think paddle is currently running the risk of maybe tarnishing itself with a reputation that it doesn't deserve and doesn't necessarily want by having high court fees that are not easily accessible and potentially, difficult to get into the sport. And that
Just like cut you off a minute. Did you see the headline yesterday in the Telegraph?
I did, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a label we want to be tarnished with, I guess.
No, it's absolutely not. And I genuinely believe, knowing the people that are involved in paddle, that it's not a label that paddle deserves, and it's definitely not a label that paddle wants or needs. Um, and it's a very difficult time, and I think there's some difficult decisions that need to be made to support the sport to go in the right direction. And it's almost you know, we almost need a group mentality across business owners and developers and facility managers to remind everybody really that we are working within a sport. And if we want to get Great Britain represented at Olympics, and not just as a token representation, but actually putting in a really good effort to potentially, get into the top 10 or podium at an Olympic Games, then we have to remind ourselves that we are all working within a sport, and the sport is playing the game and spectating the top players. But the only way that's going to happen is if we encourage the next generation of players to become those top players. Exactly in the example I mentioned around, you know, Spanish juniors, a lot of them regard paddle as their sport. And as much as I will play paddle as a very untalented paddle player, from a playing perspective, my sport will always be football. And I think really for us to catch up these other nations, we need to get to a point where, the next generation or the generation after that, we are growing up with a significant number of players that identify themselves as lifelong paddle players. And we need to give them the ability to do that.
No, totally agree. And it will get there. It'll,
Oh,
imagine
undoubtedly.
the same as squash in the 80s. That wouldn't have gone straight. People were spending, you had to call 2 weeks ahead to book your court, or maybe it was even longer, and there wouldn't have been the junior sessions on offer in the same way. So it will come, and I guess it's going to also be down to facility access and court building. And I'm interested to get your take on the wider view of where paddle is in the UK. Has it surprised you? Obviously we can talk about planning permission and stunted growth. Obviously LTA running paddle, the influence of tennis. I think there's a big broad spectrum that we'd love to hear your take on where paddle is in the UK at the moment, generally, and how we're set up for success going forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, as a sport, I think it's in a great place, and I think its growth from particularly when the LTA has taken it on till now, whether that's directly their input or not, I think is probably up for debate in a lot of places, but I won't go into that. But I think, yeah, the growth from then till now, it must have surprised a lot of people. Even the most devout paddle fans and paddle lovers must be pleased with the level of growth. But I think we also need to be conscious that when you're in the paddle world, you do run the risk of getting wrapped up in the paddle bubble. I'm very lucky to be able to live in Devon, with a family and friends around me, uh, because of the geographical space we're in, that know very little about paddle. And I will be in conversations with my friends or, yeah, with family, and I'm the only paddle voice that they hear. And it's a really nice, humbling moment to remind you where you are with the sport in the grand scheme of things, and the fact that there is still a very, very long way for it to go to start competing with other sports and activities. So for me, I think as a sport and as somebody that's really interested in sports development, it's been amazing to be part of the journey. It's been fascinating to watch it, and I think that it's grown at a rate that I definitely was not expecting it to. But it is always nice to just step outside of that bubble and just remind yourself, actually, we are still working in probably what is regarded as quite a niche space. And there's still a lot of investment, a lot of development, and a lot of time that needs to go into the sport before we can, really class it as a consistent mainstream sport that can start competing with other sports that, are embedded into our culture. How long is it going to take it before paddle becomes a standard sport that is perhaps taught in schools? I think we're probably quite a distance away from that if you compare us to all the other sports that are delivered at school. So yeah, I think it's in a fantastic place, and I think very quickly to refer back to our other point around the stage of which paddle is right now, I think this is an important stage for the sport. We need all of this investment from these private companies. We need the interest from these businesses plowing resource into the sport. It might feel like it's a very challenging moment at the moment in terms of access and sort of affordability, but I think without this stage, we're not going to get the rapid growth of courts that we need and the increase in engagement, awareness, and participation for us to kind of get over that hill and to a place that we all think we should be.
Yeah, absolutely. All makes total sense. So let's talk about our partnership that we've obviously been trying to figure out how we would work together since your time at the LTA a couple of years ago. But I'm excited to announce that the R3 Bull Paddle Tour is partnering with Paddle Levels, and we're going to be bringing up to date tournament rankings to the tour, and then ultimately player ratings, and the results will be feeding into the system, and it gives us a benchmark with our vision to try and create a genuine UK paddle rating, with the best players at the top all the way down to beginner players coming in who are new to the sport, with this system agnostic rating system. That means you can take your rating anywhere, whether you play in an LTA event, a FIP event, your local box league, ideally play a match on your booking platform. Our vision is to join all of those up and let people take their ratings wherever they go. So just love to get your unbiased take on ratings and the importance of ratings. And I guess they've been a topic for you guys at the LTA when you were there for a number of years, but what your take is on a good, active, genuine rating system and the importance of it to the growth of the sport.
Well, I mean, I've always been. Firstly, I'm very, very excited about this partnership. It has been far too long coming, but I'm really excited about it, and I'm so pleased that we can now announce it, and the value that this will offer to players that take part in the R3 Ball Paddle Cup, I think, can't be understated, both in the short and long term. I'm a huge advocate for a unified, accurate rating system. I was very lucky while I was at the LTA to work closely on the ITF World Tennis number when that was brought in as well, and delivered a lot of that project around that. And as soon as paddle came onto the LTA's radar, I was really shouting around how we should be pushing for a very similar mechanism to support the development of paddle. And I think that rightly so, certain booking systems and platforms have created their own rating systems, which for new players and inexperienced players within their very tight bubble of activity that they take part on that rating system, I think having a rating and the ability to compare yourself to others is a vitally important mechanism to support you in getting the best out of the sport. I'm, as I mentioned, nowhere near a talented paddle player, but the difference that in a match where you are playing against people of a similar standard to not is massive, and having some form of rating behind that to support you is really important. I think not only will it help, not only does it help engagement, initial engagement into the sport, I think it helps long-term engagement in the sport and keeping people playing more often and for longer. The
I
challenge comes. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to jump in and say, I've been putting investment decks together and thinking about how we sum up what we do. And it all comes back to a line at the beginning of the deck, which just says, we fundamentally believe sport is more enjoyable when players and opponents are evenly matched.
Oh,
and I think,
100%.
Nobody wants to a one-sided win, and nobody wants to be on the receiving end of a thrashing. And if
No.
you come back to that statement that sport becomes more enjoyable, and ratings are the thing that allow you to do that. And as you say, engagement goes up, participation rates go up, desire to improve goes up. The speed at which people improve, the opportunity to run better sessions, the opportunity to arrange better, like everything is centered on it, in my opinion. And I would say that, with this.
Of course, but the anecdotal evidence supports all of that one of the key reasons why people don't play in tennis or paddle is finding people of a similar level to play against. One of the key determinants of why particularly females don't compete as regularly or don't get into a new sport is essentially a fear of standard and a misunderstanding that they feel they won't be good enough or will embarrass themselves. Well, having some data around yourself to squash those feelings is only going to help. The real challenge at the moment with paddle is you and I could be walking around with 3 different numbers that we regard as our rating. I've got, oh yeah, this is my rating here. Well, my rating is this number, and they don't actually communicate to each other. And that's for me why I think paddle levels is so important, because we need that one measure of truth, that one consistent number, the one language that everybody can speak together, so that whether you are, competing anywhere in this country, or even if you go abroad and compete, why can you not jump onto a booking system when you're on holiday for a week and you've snuck your paddle racket in your bag, and find 3 others that have a similar rating of you, and you can go and have a really great match? Like, why can't that be the case? Why can't that be the case in this country? You move house, you're away with work, whatever it might be. Doesn't matter what booking system you use, doesn't matter how you're going to get to court. That one solid piece of understanding that I know you're my level and I'm your level, and that means that we're more likely to have a great match, is vitally important.
Yeah, no, amen. And it's a big year for us, and obviously this partnership with you guys helps bring us validation, being able to work with those top guys and having everybody else in the UK being able to benchmark their level against the pros is obviously great for us, and we're looking forward to delivering lots of value to you and working closely with you and seeing where the relationship evolves. So yeah, watch this space, guys. I'm interested to hear more about the other partnerships you're looking at and innovation within the sport, and where you see further innovation coming from in paddle, probably in the digital side of things and technology and AI. And interested if you're able to share some of the conversations you're having, or the areas that you're exploring, and where you see innovation coming from within the sport at the moment.
For sure. I think in my own mind, I try and break this down into kind of like 2 different sections. So probably like a tournament experience arm, and then maybe like a participation arm. from a tournament experience, I mean, it's a completely untapped area. You see Premier Padel, Hexagon Cup, they're starting to kind of get into the data side of the sport and bringing that to life more and more for spectators. I think there's a million miles more that we can go with that. When you look at other sports, I mean, football's a primary example, but the NFL do it brilliantly as well. They really bring the sport to life through the data that's available, and whether that's being captured manually or whether that's through the use of AI, I think that we've got a whole load of scope there, where we can really provide a broadcast offer that not only entertains and engages, but also hopefully educates people on how to play the sport and the meaning behind the decisions that the players are making. Um, that's kind of one area. I think there's a whole lot of development around kind of the servicing of tickets to spectators and the additional benefits and information that you can provide people with that. We're working with an exciting company to offer ticketing services for all of our events, which is quite interesting. And then from a coaching and playing perspective, I think this is where AI really comes into its own. I think I can definitely see a world where, more often than not, you will find a camera on the paddle court that you're playing with, and having the use of AI to analyze and review the footage of a training session or a practice match, highlight areas of potential strength or areas for improvement within your game, and then building out coaching plans or directing you to content in order to support your development. I think there's a huge potential in those elements, and there are a number of companies out there that are kind of starting to look into that. Even from a more basic level of participation point of view, I think we're on a broad scale. We don't even understand like what are the most common injuries in paddle. What sort of like long-term or recurable injuries do you get? What sort of niggles are most common with paddle players? What sort of preventative treatment can you take for them? How do you manage certain injuries or manage certain body movements in paddle? And that's, not even from a technology point of view, but there are companies such as, the Paddle Physio and other physio companies that are starting to look into those things. I think will be able to give a lot of benefit to not only just the pros, but for want of a better phrase, like your average paddle players as well, like myself.
Yeah, well, there's undoubtedly a whole ecosystem about to grow or in the process of growing around this whole sport, right? But I guess interested to get your take commercial. Where do you see the biggest commercial opportunities? Because right now it clearly is court bookings, right? I'm guessing that's where the money is being made and the prices that are being charged. But I guess broadcast rights are only going to get more valuable, betting. But I guess interested to know where you see the commercial opportunities unfolding over the next 5 to 10 years in the sport.
Yeah, I mean, 5 to 10 years. I'm always a little bit cautious of planning that far ahead, I think,
Let's go 3.
with paddle, because it seems like it's changing every day. Like you say, commercially, court bookings are far ahead currently. I think there's going to be a real increase in scope within the sponsorship sector, particularly as tournaments and events become larger. That will likely go hand in hand with the broadcast revenue as well. Hexagon Cup have done a fantastic job of really putting a different event out there from a broadcast point of view, working with the likes of ITV. I feel like there is a large deal on the horizon for a paddle event to be streamed on a major, not saying ITV is not a major platform, but prime time terrestrial TV or a major platform such as Amazon, Netflix, something along those kind of lines. I see that a lot. We've not even touched on the whole gambling or betting segment yet. That will inevitably come in time as well. And then I think in this country it will be major events. I think once we have that first major event, I think that's really where the bulk of the bulk of the commercial value will start coming from, and it'll be interesting to see how that major event is structured, because there'll be a lot of additional commercial opportunities wrapped around that. If you look at the likes of working with celebrities, if you follow the same kind of infrastructure as the Hexagon Cup.
Yeah, totally. And I guess, there is this corporate interest in the sport, but do you think it's yet fully understood, from the corporate side, the potential that padel has, or do you think that actually has been kind of factored in and people are understanding and they're just trying to get into the sport early because they do see the potential upside for, the next 3 to 5 years?
I don't think it's been fully realized. I think there are a lot of very, very intelligent people that are working in this space, or at minimum keeping an eye on this space. And they have a roadmap of potential opportunities that could develop out of it. I think the key thing is, though, the word potential, because again, we're seeing fantastic growth. It's really driving from a participation point of view, but step outside of that bubble, and what does it look like? And I think that's where some businesses and some kind of the leading people in this space are potentially just saying, well, let's just let's give it a little bit more time and see what happens there, or see what happens here, and just biding their time for when they want to make their move. So yes, I do think that people recognize the commercial value and all of the opportunities, but I do think there's probably development further on from that as the sport continues to grow.
For sure. So I think, it's always worth chatting about Sweden and the comparisons of the UK with Sweden. I think we're in a different space, but on a different time, being post-COVID, but obviously Sweden saw its rapid growth and then the decline in padel adoption. Everyone's trying to build courts. I'm speaking to lots of different club owners, and the number of sites that people have lined up is, they're not getting necessarily the planning permission right now, but they've got tenders in, and you can see a world where there are lots and lots and lots of padel clubs. Ultimately, what's your take on how it potentially shapes out at the kind of club level, and who's going to thrive, who's going to survive, who's going to maybe struggle? What do you see at the kind of club level and the future?
It's interesting, and you draw the comparisons from Sweden. It makes it further interesting again. Strangely, potentially, planning regulations in this country may be a blessing in disguise, because it hasn't allowed us to go absolutely ridiculous on the number of courts overnight. So as much as it frustrates me, and I know many others, it may not be the worst thing in the world to put the brakes on slightly. Who will come out on top? Who might struggle? I'm not so sure. I think that from my point, I think you need some real good justification for these very large centers that are built close to other very large centers. You need really solid demographic information. You need to know the people around those centers, and have some really solid plans on how you're going to develop the sport in that area, beyond just driving people to court for an hour every couple of weeks. I really like kind of the 5 to 6 court venues that are coming along. I think there are some fantastic people that are kind of looking at that model and trying to drive the sport through those. There is obviously a place for these large venues like Rocket, like We Are Paddle in Derby, like Surge, for example. Obviously not an exclusive list, there are many others. But yeah, to have a high number of those, in my personal opinion, at this stage, it could cause problems. And I think that's what the likes of Sweden and Denmark have seen. But we're a nation of sports lovers, so I think if you give people the opportunity to go and play, and they can get to a court, then great. And I'm a fair weather player, so the more courts that are covered, and the more courts that you can access more frequently without having to dodge a rainstorm here and there, I think the better the sport will do. But obviously, it costs more, so it's a fine balance to find.
Yeah. Yes, but then if more courts come available, maybe it becomes cheaper. So maybe there's
Well, yeah, and that we'll only get that answer in time, I guess. But undeniably, right now, there's a staggering latent demand for paddle. And we have to supply that by building more courts. And I think we've got some fantastic operators out there and developers that are doing just that. And hopefully we just do it in a sensible fashion, which I think we have up to this point.
No, I said the same thing about the planning permission potentially being a blessing in disguise in an interview the other day. I think staggered growth is a good thing. Give people time to think it through and make wise decisions.
100%, 100%, because without that, I could definitely see a world where just paddle clubs are popping up left, right, and center, and just awareness in the sport wouldn't be able to support that probably at this stage. But I think that I would like the number of courts to catch up a little bit to demand. I think there's probably we're starting to get a little bit more too much of a space between demand and number of courts. I'd like it to catch up a little bit, but I don't think it has to. I don't think it should really take it over significantly.
No, and I'd love to just get your take, especially with your LTA background, on the impact of paddle on tennis and tennis clubs and tennis courts, and whether you've got any kind of take on that. And there's obviously conversions of tennis courts to paddle courts for obvious reasons financially, but where do you see it shaking out, and the impact on the other sports? I guess coming from a squash background, speaking for myself, I'm definitely playing more paddle than I am squash, and there is that transition for older players. But wondering what your take is on the impact on tennis.
For me, it's all going to come down, obviously, to personal choice and enjoyment, right? But if tennis sees paddle as a threat or as a competitor, then it's kind of over to tennis a little bit to like up your game. And I'm not saying that LTA. I'm not directing that towards the LTA. I'm directing that towards tennis clubs. Provide as good an experience as you can. If you go to paddle, you had likely gone through a very high-tech, very smooth user experience through a booking platform to get to that court. When you get to that court, you've likely got a cafe around you, potentially. It's in a nice setting. The lighting is brilliant. There's equipment there for you to rent or buy if you wish to, as well as all these other kind of
You've got tunes
elements
on in the background. Everybody's having a dance and a smile, and
exactly. You've got that community of paddle people around you that are all very friendly and welcoming, and they'll invite you to this thing and that thing and the other thing. So we can direct that at tennis, but we can also direct it at squash, and we can direct it at football, and we can direct it at running and all these other sports where people are actually saying, no, I'm going to go and do paddle a little bit more. Well, if you see all those things as a threat, then up your game. It might sound brutal, but paddle is competing with all of those things, and it's ready for the competition, I think. So everybody else has to react and make sure that they can deal with that.
Go on.
I'm not a huge fan of taking away from other sports for a sport. So like I'm not a massive advocate of the principle behind replacing a tennis court with a paddle court, or replacing a football pitch with a number of paddle courts. Not a massive fan on principle, because that for me, that's more of a direct impact on that sport. And that just doesn't quite sit wholly right with me. However, from a commercial point of view, in a lot of circumstances, I understand it. You can fit more bang for your buck in the same space. You can get more money from that then. So a lot of times, if you look at it with a business hat on, it makes perfect sense. But from a sports point of view, I'm not a massive fan of it.
No, that's Yeah, you're a good man, Sam. You're a good man.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So what about pickleball? Have you got a take on that? And yeah, what's your role and relationship been with pickle over the years? Have you had much involvement there, and how do you see that sport evolving and growing?
Yeah, so involvement has, I would say, been sporadic and here and there up to this point. Um, it's definitely something that we are going to explore as R3, and I'm very excited to do that. I see a lot of potential in it. If you look at the US, almost turf war like scenario between pickleball, paddle, and tennis, and I actually think that pickleball is winning that fight at the moment in the US. So you can see the level of growth there. I think maybe speaking slightly too openly, but I think from a sports development standpoint, um, pickleball has got a huge opportunity for growth in this country. You have a sports hall with four, you know, not to shun badminton, but badminton courts, readily available whenever you want to easily set up a pickleball court and go and play. The problem with that, and why I think pickleball maybe hasn't had the same level of support as paddle has at the moment, is that's not the most commercially viable model for a private investor to get involved in. So pure sports development, huge opportunity, could have thousands and thousands of people playing pickleball if if you set it up in the correct way and pushed it in that way. But do I think we're going to see standalone pickleball venues to match the same level of standalone paddle venues? Uh, I'm not so sure on that. I think we'll start to see more hybrid venues though. I think we'll start to see a lot of paddle and pickleball, and I think there's a lot of I actually think that's a very commercially savvy thing to do. Less infrastructure to pay for and build, same amount of people on a court. Yeah, makes sense.
No, my business partners just launched a club um, over in the States, and that's common. There's squash, pickle, and paddle,
Yeah.
and another friend of mine with pickle and paddle over there, and it seems like a winning combo. I mean, it would be an amazing thing to see, wouldn't it? So
Oh,
per
and
built.
I genuinely think pickleball will follow the same path as paddle. I really do. Very, very interesting um, situation and decision by Sport England around the governance of pickleball. I think that's sent a lot of ripples across that sport, but also paddle. Very, very interesting. And I'm quite excited to see kind of what happens there over the next sort of
Well,
6 to 12 months.
I went to the English Pickleball Open and hung out with Karen, and that event was something else. Over the course of a week, I think it was 18 to 1900 participants, which
Yeah.
has to be the biggest participation racket sport event in the UK ever. I mean, I can't think of a single event that would have had more participants. Maybe badminton, I might be wrong, but I can't think of a tennis event that's got 1900 people playing it over 1 week. It was
Not over 1 week, and they garner some pretty serious sponsors as well, right? Like they've got some
Sketchers,
very
yeah, Sketchers
yeah.
heading it up, and it was immaculately run. And I can only got good things to say about England. With the job Karen was doing around that event. So yeah, very interesting.
I mean, you're going to see from not you're going to see from us very soon. We'll take our first steps into pickleball, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
More conversations for us to have then, Sam, around
Well,
pickleball ratings.
I was going to say pickle levels. It's
That's
got
it.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely something we're thinking about and looking into. So I think we're heading towards the end of the interview, but I'd love to just get you some closing thoughts, and what's one of the most expected things that you've learned in your time working in paddle? What surprised you over the last few years?
Oh yeah, great question. I mean, a lot of things is the very easy answer. I think the overall speed of growth I can't deny that surprised me, and not just within the sport, but outside of the sport as well. the kind of immediate, it feels like, uptake from a celebrity perspective and all the additional interest that has brought, I think has skyrocketed the paddle to a level that is, is far beyond any other sports development that I've seen. That for me is the biggest surprise. And yeah, I think it's a great thing. I hope that will continue and continue to surprise me as well, with a number of people that get involved, and we're seeing that. I mean, look at Ronaldo recently, for free, streaming the Premier Padel event on his own platform with no comeback to him whatsoever at that stage. Who else does that? Or, what other celebrities do that for any other activity, let alone what some would call an unknown niche sport? So that is very surprising, and I think it can only be an indication of where the sport is going.
Amazing. So, final question: where can people follow you and R3 and understand what you guys are up to? What's the best thing for them to do to keep a handle on all the amazing stuff that you're doing within the industry?
Yeah, so come and join us on Instagram. It's where you're going to see all of our best bits, all of the amazing footage from all of our events, all our latest updates. We're there, R3 Sport UK, and you'll find all our links to our website, how to get tickets for our upcoming events, and all of our latest plans are all going to be there. You can also keep track on all of our players and how they're faring as well. So yeah, come and join us on Instagram.
Superb. Sam, this has been insightful and wonderful to speak to you. As I've said, we're incredibly excited about the partnership and the ongoing work we're going to be doing together. So thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your insights with everybody, and we massively appreciate it.
No, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to showing everybody just how successful this partnership can be. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Cheers, Sam.
Before you dash off, a quick favour to ask. If you've enjoyed today's dive into the world of sports and technology with us, do hit that follow button on your preferred podcasting streaming service. Following us not only keeps you updated with the latest episodes, but also greatly supports the show. It's a simple click for you, but a huge leap for us in continuing to bring insightful and engaging content your way. So go on, give that follow button a little tap, and let's keep the conversation rolling. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to have you back on our next episode.